Good morning, Bill. Thank you so much for being here today. You're the very first one of this series of interview that I started, this project of mine. So why don't you please introduce yourself?
You bet. Hi, Alessandra. Thank you for the opportunity to visit with you. My name's Bill Merrow, and I'm an international marketing consultant. I've served as an outsourced or a fractional chief marketing officer for over 100 firms around the world. I'll do my long background as quickly as I can.
Hmm.
So I served 10 years in the U.S. Army, and I got to have 2 tours in Germany, spent over 5 years there. I joined Cigna Healthcare when I got out of the Army in the insurance business. I got to serve as controller for their systems division, and I implemented a national information system in over 40 health plans around the country. I then joined American Express, and I led sales for their long-term care insurance division, where I built a 40,000 person sales team on the
Wow.
path to what became a $1 billion business. Also, while I was at Amex, I led their annuity division, and we sold $500 million of annuities in 18 months. I later
Wow.
consulted with General Electric for over 5 years. I worked with their acquisition team where I integrated the sales teams of 7 companies GE acquired and assimilated.
Wow.
And then I worked with a consulting company where I led a 3-day workshop in management principles and practices, training over 1,000 business owners and writing over 300 business plans.
Wow.
I ran my own advertising agency for 5 years, and then I shifted my focus to this fractional CMO model in 2008. I believe my undergraduate degree in accounting and my graduate degree in behavioral science enable me to provide a unique perspective on both the art and the science of marketing and sales with a
Yeah.
strong orientation to measurement and doing what produces profitable results.
Perfect. Perfect. Sounds great. Wow. Okay. So what does this, a lot of business and professionals will know. I never heard about this fractional. What does that mean, fractional
Yeah,
CFO?
I think where it's very prominent is in the fractional chief financial officer area.
Hmm.
A lot of people don't need a full-time CFO, but they do need
Okay.
CFO advice, and that's kind of extended itself into areas like chief operating officers and chief
Hmm.
executive
Hmm.
officers, where someone works at multiple companies.
Okay.
Because again, they can't afford a full-time person, but they need that leadership, and it kind of extended about 10 or 12 years ago into the marketing
Okay.
area as well. We were kind of on the cutting edge of that for a long time.
Hmm.
On Google, we were like in the top 3 for outsourced CMO, and then
Okay.
we got really busy and we didn't pay attention to that anymore.
Right. So that fractional means they just get you for a fraction of your time, meaning
Exactly.
just
Uh-huh.
for a specific project or a specific length of time,
Yeah, and,
right?
and and in my experience with it, it's just like having, in a larger company, a full-time CMO. It's
Hmm.
just again because of the size of the company, you don't need them full-time, but they still provide all of the functions. I still do everything from target marketing to product and pricing and promotion and distribution. So it's a full meal deal.
Absolutely. All right. So tell me a little bit about your home culture, the one that makes sense to you.
You bet. So I'll just start at home. I've
Yes.
worked from home since 1995.
Hmm.
Right now, I'm based in Phoenix, Arizona,
Yeah.
and we really have a very high proportion of small businesses, but very few large Fortune 500 companies.
Hmm.
So there's a great entrepreneurial spirit here and drive, but there's also a little bit of a relaxed, collegial spirit of community as well, and that tends to be what happens when you have 300 days of sunshine every year. Is there's plenty of
Right.
time for work and plenty of time for play.
Well, place. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Here in Atlanta, we have 300 days of humidity.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
And the other thing I'd add is the local community, the culture. There's really a lot of know, like, and trust relationships that lead to
Hmm.
connections. So that old adage of it's who you know, not what you know, that matters most is certainly very prevalent. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I see, you mentioned earlier that you study behavioral science. So you teach me that, in the in cultures or in geographical areas where the weather is warmer, relationship between people are more common, more deep, more. It's just different than Northern cultures.
Yeah, and what I'd add to that, Alessandra, is I think there's a notion, maybe less so in more so in Phoenix and less so in Atlanta, where everybody's from somewhere else.
Yeah,
So there's a melting pot of culture just
absolutely.
because it's not absolutely true, but
Hmm.
it's like you could say no one's really from here.
Right.
Not true. There are some, but most of the
Right.
people came from somewhere else, right? Yeah.
Okay, okay. So again, within your own country, what are the some of the differences that you notice going from one city to another? Again, from the city to maybe a smaller town. What's
Great
your
question. Yeah.
experience with
Yeah,
that?
I think, a contrast I'd make is, I think in the US, I've had the great opportunity to work with people in nearly every major metropolitan area, Los Angeles, New York, Boston, Atlanta, Dallas, Seattle, but also in smaller communities like, Salt Lake City, Aberdeen, South Dakota,
Hmm.
Birmingham, Alabama. So, there are people um, uh, all across the country that I've had the great fortune to work with. And I think there's an aspect of it, that everybody's the same in that they want to be recognized and honored as unique and important, but there are also cultural nuances in every geography as well. And
Right.
what struck me as an example is I have a client in Los Angeles that every conversation is go, 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 and go faster.
Okay. Okay.
It's like, let's get to business. What are we doing now? Let's do more. And then
Okay.
I have a client in Minneapolis who we never start with business. We always start personal and slow down. What's happening in your life? How's things
Right.
going?
Right.
And
Right.
they're
Right.
both equally driven to grow their business and drive results. But you really have to be cognizant of you can't be one way all the time. You have to adapt to their style. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now you said Los Angeles, go, go, go. Is just this particular person? Because
No, 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 no.
okay.
I mean, I like your point because I think normally you'd associate that maybe with New York.
Right, right. And again, and not being American, and I never been to Los Angeles yet, so I don't know. Sounds strange to me that.
Yeah, and again, certainly that's why, again, it's very individualized. But I
Mhm.
think there's a nature of the pace in Los Angeles, maybe in Las Vegas, where it's really fast paced and wanting to get to business and get to results
Okay.
and to drive. Very similar to New
So
York, but
and is it Los Angeles or California in general?
no, I think California has pockets as well. You might
Okay.
see a little similarity in San Francisco, but you'll see it very different in Sacramento or Bakersfield or somewhere like that, where it's
Okay.
much more rural and less big city. Move, go, go, go. Yeah.
Mm-mm-mm. Okay, interesting. And what about foreign countries, your
Yeah, I mean,
experience
I
abroad?
actually had to list the countries before I could count them, so I did that. I started with
Uh,
Canada, Mexico, we're obviously close by. I've done a
mhm.
ton of business in Israel, Germany, Norway, England, India, Pakistan, China, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, the
Yeah.
Philippines, Bolivia, and Chile. So I think that's 15. I'm sure I've forgotten some countries, but that would be my count at the moment. 15 different countries I've had
Wow,
pleasure of working with.
that's a great experience. So tell me a little bit about, the ones that again you remember the most and that struck you the most as different
You
from
bet. So I'm not going to go through 15 stories, of
right.
course. So I'm going to just share some challenge that I see is
Hmm.
present in doing business overseas or in
Yes.
other countries, and then with a few examples. So
Right.
I think the first thing you have to do is honor and respect the other person and their culture,
Right.
and that means you probably need to slow down and really listen much more closely than maybe you would normally. I mean, listening is always a good thing, but when you're dealing with someone overseas, you need to listen even more
Absolutely.
carefully than before.
Absolutely. Yes. And this is, a general rule that goes for every country,
Mhm.
and I think that well most Americans doing business abroad are lucky enough because you always find somebody that speaks English, so it doesn't. Sometimes it's not necessary to approach this different culture using again interpreters or maybe translators, but it may be useful at the very beginning. So maybe showing that first step towards, again, the showing respect and trying to understand a different culture. And then maybe they can tell you, well, we can speak English, but
Yeah,
that's
and I think I want to comment on the translating part for a second
uh-huh.
because um, I have had the opportunity to do that, in dealing with Mexico and having
Yes,
translator involved. And when I think about other opportunities that I've had, perhaps in Germany, perhaps in China, they recognize that, frankly, Americans are lazy and don't speak anything but English. So, most people do speak English, but I
right,
think again, there's an honor in being able to find a way to converse in their language and also to
right.
get more clarity. And I know, particularly from my experience using it with Spanish folks, is it really, really does transform the relationship,
Yes,
because even if you
yes,
don't
it
have
does.
that as your tongue,
Hmm.
you really, by having someone making sure the understanding is there,
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
just makes it a deeper connection and relationship. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
I think the other thing I'd add to the listening part is you really have to be curious. I mean, you really have to ask questions, be interested, really
Hmm.
care
Hmm.
about the person and the unique things that are going on with them. I'll do a funny story about Israel. I'm going to tell another story about Israel in a second. But sometimes you're sitting there and you hear the sirens going off, and you worry
Hmm.
about who's getting bombed today. And they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, that's nothing." it's
Yeah, that's
it's
part of our,
it's just funny that how people react to things. We'd be freaking
mhm,
out, and they're like, just
right.
another day. Um,
Okay.
and then I think the perhaps the most important thing is, once you've listened, once you're curious, is to make sure that your actions are congruent. Don't go back to your style after you've had a great conversation to get
Right,
aligned with their
right,
style.
right,
Really stay in that path. And what
right.
I found with clients in Israel is there's a lot of pride in kind of knowing that they're right. They're very confident, and they're in belief in their products, and they really don't like being told what to do. They're working with you
Mhm.
because they want you to improve their results, but it kind of has to be, kind of their idea on how you get things done. So again, you
Okay.
just have to be cognizant of that, willing to surrender to, hey, we're going to work together and we'll, use my skills to help
Mm-hmm.
you be better, but it's not going to be me telling you what to do. It's going to be us concluding together what the right path
What
is.
the right path is.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You sound like me. I may have some Israeli blood somewhere. That's yeah, that's why you
It's
don't
funny.
like
I
know what
have
to
so
do.
many, from not to bring religion
Mm-hmm.
into it too much, but I have so many Jewish friends and business
Uh-huh.
colleagues that I feel like I'm an adopted Jew,
To
right?
do it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you were talking earlier about this curiosity, which is so important because there are certain, you can hear and learn, about the proper way to reach out to different countries. But if really that curiosity and that interest, you can't fake it. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Uh, it will transpire through your body language and what you say, that you're just saying it with a specific end, to a specific end, so for a specific purpose, and is not really but that's why, again, in my interpretation service, we use a lot video. As you can see, I'm Italian. My hands are always talking with my hands. But the body language is extremely important because your
Hmm.
body will always tell the truth on you. So, it's it's funny, but they will see if your curiosity and your will to understand is really there, or you just have a purpose, and, and that's it.
Yeah, and
That's it.
just giving a couple other quick examples of some other countries, working with people from India.
Hmm.
What's amazing is the depth of education
Yeah.
of almost everybody you're working with, but
Hmm.
there's an acknowledgement that while they have the academic understanding of maybe how to sell in North America, they don't have the experience of doing it. So there's much more of an openness, as long as you honor and revere that you're working with really, really smart people that are just looking for what's the right path to do it. So they're more open to, why don't we approach it this way? And again, you don't necessarily have to say, oh, we made it your idea, but it has to be that coming together of knowing exactly how we're going to execute. And I think, again, using India as an example, there's a high expectation that once you lay out a path, that you're going to execute on that path and demonstrate the results.
Okay, great, great, very interesting. Okay, and then maybe one other country you want to.
Yeah, what I talk about Canada because I had a really long relationship with the company in
Mm-hmm.
Canada, and everybody knows that Canadians are just friendly people, and they
Okay.
are. But
Yes.
so they're very patient and very precise in their execution of their plans. But the one thing that they're not, in my experience, is risk taking. So you have to really balance that while they want to achieve the goals, they're not going to bet the farm or bet the factory on
Okay.
that this is going to be the answer. They're going to be very calculated in their
Mm-hmm.
approach to things and very patient about making sure that you're doing the right things and not just rushing to a result and putting the company at risk. So
Okay.
really,
And
really
what
smart.
part of Canada do you have?
I'm both sides of the country and as well as Toronto. So
Mm-hmm.
out in the New Brunswick area, in British Columbia, but a lot of work in Ontario as well. And again,
Okay.
like we said, even in the States, the
And did
cultures
you
are very
notice any
yeah,
difference
absolutely, absolutely.
between
Again,
different
very,
areas?
very laid back on the coast.
Uh-huh.
It's almost the opposite of the States. The
Okay.
coast is go, 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 New York, LA,
Uh-huh.
but in Canada, it's more the Vancouver, Prince Edward Island is much more laid back and methodical, and Toronto is more go, go, go.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. So any particular situation that you remember or experience where there has been some maybe misunderstanding in dealing with different cultures?
I don't think that I've thought about that a lot when you posed that question. I didn't really look back and find a lot of misunderstandings based on people or their culture. I think it's when, again, you're trying to impose your values, your culture
Mm-hmm.
on them, it's just never going to work. And,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of my philosophy has always been, there's well, let's meet halfway, let's meet in the middle. And I
Right.
don't think that's the
Mm-hmm.
right answer. I think you need to go all the way to where they are. Really that reduces misunderstandings and eliminates them most of the time. But if you really put everything into, I need to understand you. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
you'll understand me over time. That's okay. But
Okay.
what I need to do from the start is get deeply immersed in them and their culture and understand what drives them. Because again, each person's an individual, but
Mm-hmm.
they are influenced by their culture for sure.
Right. I wanted to mention something about that. I don't know if you know about this book and the culture
Oh
map.
wow, no.
Erin Mayer is
Mm-hmm.
very, very, very interesting. And I came to find out, let me see, page 67. I should have had the page open. There you go. Okay. It talks about, and you can find it online, the Anglo-Dutch translation guide. And it's just a list of brief statements that you can say in English that can be highly misunderstood
Oh,
in
uh-huh.
other language. Well, misunderstood the sense. Like I'll give you a short example. When somebody says you present something, let's say you're my boss, and I'll show you an idea or the draft of a project that I think could be a good idea for a company, and you say very interesting. Okay, so that very interesting, would be maybe a polite way to say I don't think that's going to work, or it doesn't really mean what you're saying.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But let's say there's a need of an interpreter between you and me. The interpreter would translate very interesting. So the poor guy is like, okay, he loves it. Then maybe take 2 or 3 days to work a presentation in details of this project and stuff, and it was actually not what was requested. It gives a few
What's
example on this type of little.
Yeah, well, what's interesting, going back to a point you made earlier on, is your body language. Again, it's not just your words.
Right.
It's your tone,
True.
it's your body language with it,
Hmm.
and that phrase. If we were face to face, um, you know, and saying that all of that additional communication comes
Hmm.
through.
Right.
You know whether I meant that complimentary or derogatory. And
Right.
when it's just the words operating, which sometimes on the phone that can be that way, the
Exactly.
meaning is unclear. So you
Right.
have to be,
Right.
again, slow down
Hmm.
and really be precise in your communication and
Right.
not just be lazy and say, oh, yeah, that's interesting,
Now,
and
how do you feel about this? And again, in my industry, interpretation is usually heard like, "Oh, no, no, this is a big no-no." Like the interpreter, in case the interpreter is sensing that there's a little misunderstanding on, or maybe would like to add a few words to make sure the other person understands properly. To add some input. Of course, the interpreter will let the client know. So for example, let's make sure that he understood, or he or she understood. Like for example, what I noticed in this book called The Culture Map, it talks about extensively, is usually the tendency of Americans to use positive words for negative feedback. And so you said, oh, how important you are for the company, how great of a job you're doing overall, blah, 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 blah. And then at the end, maybe they just add, maybe you could change a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and they make it sound like he can do it, but it's not very important, whereas the whole reason for the meeting that day was for the person to improve, to point out what needs to be
yeah, well,
improved.
we, we,
So
we won't we won't get lost in the psychobabble of that and trying to analyze why Americans are passive aggressive. We won't go there today.
right.
but but I do think your point around the
Hmm.
interpreter, the translator, being able to slow down the conversation and explain what that means. And again, maybe through asking questions, maybe through
Right.
paraphrasing, playing it back, are great techniques to again make sure that the understanding is rock solid,
Right.
and heaven forbid, if there was an unintended message, maybe clearing that up before it becomes an
Right.
issue. That's great.
Right. Because he may be not necessary, but it's always better to too much than too
And
little
that, to me, that
details.
needs to be the ground rules. Is if
Right.
you're working with people where making sure the communication is rock solid is to be able to state up front. Look, if there's a point made that I, as the translator, feel
Hmm.
needs to be elaborated on and explained and to gain full understanding, I need your permission to do that.
Right.
And smart people would say, of course, please help us communicate better.
Yes. Right. Absolutely. And funny stories, things
Yeah,
that
so I had one that's real quick where it was just the accent that was funny. We were working
Mhm.
with a gentleman in Bolivia, and he
Yes.
used to say, "Flesh is not your friend." And I said, "What would you say?" He said, "Flesh is not your friend." And what he was trying to explain to us is Flash technology was not a good
Ah,
website approach. It's like, oh,
okay.
okay, I get it, But he said it so fast, it's such tone, it was hard to understand. But the story I wanted
Yeah.
to share was
Hmm.
is actually in the States, but a very different culture in selling to the military, the U.S.
Hmm.
Army. So we had a device with our client that was a perfect tool for recruiting new soldiers.
Hmm.
And my business partner, who is an absolute master persuader and connector, he had one problem though. He knew we had an army, but he didn't know anything else about the army.
Oh.
But that's okay. We sent him to climb the ladder all the way to the top of the U.S. Army Recruiting Command, and he was espousing the benefits of our product to the lieutenant colonel who was in charge of making purchase decisions. And the person was really, really, really interested. He even asked, what's the price at this volume? How do I submit a purchase order? And, the sale was done. I mean, it was millions of dollars. And as Andrew wrapped up the call, he said, "You surely won't regret this decision, Lieutenant." And the
Mm.
call ended. And the sale ended too, because you cannot, in the U.S. Army, refer to a lieutenant colonel as lieutenant. It's
Hmm.
like 7 ranks down the
Down.
chain
Ooh.
and takes
Ouch.
very great offense. And it
I
really,
bet.
killed
I
$1 million of
bet.
sales by not really being connected to the culture. And that's just,
Mm.
again in the States.
Yeah.
And now you take that overseas and everywhere, you got to really be sensitive. So,
Right.
if I were to, kind of wrap up what I think the most important thing to do is,
Hmm.
it's never to approach it to meet people halfway. It
Right.
is go all the way
Right.
to them and their culture, and then listen, be curious, and stay congruent, because it goes a
Yes.
long way to, now we
Hmm.
get to know each other, we get to like each
Right.
other, we get to trust each other, no matter what our differences are.
Right. And right now we have a lot of tools to get prepared. And one thing that I always suggest to my clients, first of all, don't wait after. Like if communication is an issue, if you prefer to use an interpreter, use the interpreter from the beginning, because then what will happen is that if you talk to this other company, let's say, and the director of the company speaks English, but again with maybe a strong accent, which makes it somewhat difficult to understand. Then if you add the interpreter after, you'd be like, "What? My English is not good. It's not good enough," and you may take offense of that.
Yeah.
But if you start by using, he will maybe just keep on using the interpreter, because maybe he knows in the end that his English is not that great, and he prefers using his own language.
Well,
So,
to me, doing it from the start, it's just smart, because, we never have more than one chance to make a first impression. So
right,
if you're doing that at the
right,
start, you're laying a
right.
great foundation. And,
Hmm.
maybe as the comfort and the trust grows,
Hmm.
maybe it becomes less important in routine conversations. But
Yes.
when there's something really important on the agenda, why
Hmm.
not bring that resource back in to
Absolutely.
help you, again, make sure that you're really locked in
Hmm.
together, and
Hmm.
recognizing the other person. Yeah.
Yes, and again, as a linguist, I discourage the use of Google Translate, which is a great tool. Don't get me wrong, but it's a great tool for, I don't know, trying to reach out to people on Facebook and then make friends. But for an example, I had a student, because for a period of time I also taught Italian. Then I realized I'm not that great of a teacher. It requires a lot of patience, so that's not for me. But I remember she was able to find part of her family back in Italy, and that was great. They went to visit, and she came back, and of course she wanted to start to learn Italian, and then they were writing to each other on Facebook, these messages, and she, for every lesson, what she wanted to do is use that letter that her cousin wrote, as material to work on her Italian. The only problem was that she would first translate it with Google Translate, and for example, I don't know why Google Translate translated as obnoxious, the word stupendo, which is stupendous, uh, as obnoxious. So, and I was talking about her children. She has twins. So she said, I don't know why my cousin would say my kids are obnoxious. So she was offended by it, and didn't speak with her, didn't reply for a while. And then when I looked at the Italian, I was like, that's not what she's saying. So see, it created this little conflict, let's say.
I
And
know,
um, and
I know,
also the Italian was terrible. That's
yeah,
another thing.
I know you have this video on your website. I mean, it just cracks me up every time I see it, where the guy is translating that, and he says, my Dutch is okay.
Oh yeah,
It's like, just okay,
that
and he ends up
AT&T
saying, they
commercial.
they
Yes,
really need a hug.
yeah, that
I
was
mean, it's just
that's
a
such a
really,
funny
but it
commercial.
reinforces, the Google Translate, and how easy it is to think you're doing
Yeah,
it right,
yeah,
and it might just only be okay or not okay.
exactly, exactly. That AT&T commercial is fantastic. That's why I took it as an example. Again, when it comes to your health, so medical, legal, your legal matters, and your business, those are, fields where it's extremely important that communication is done right. So again, it was great talking to you, Bill. And for those who will be watching this video, if you need more information, maybe on one of the countries that Bill mentioned, but of course for time, because of time, we cannot talk about all of them. Please reach out to him on maybe on LinkedIn, And yes, thank you so much for your time today.
You bet. Thank you again.
Thank you. Have a
Bye-bye.
great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.